Well, thank you. So yeah, again, thank you so much for being willing to do this. It's quite a privilege and an honor for me to be able to interview and to spend this time. So thank you so much for being willing to do this.
You're welcome.
Just thought, why don't you start just by like introducing yourself, like a little bit about where you're from, what your background is, and education background and all that stuff, and we'll go from there.
Okay, so I yeah, grew up the son of a camp director, a Christian boys camp in New York State, and went to Wheaton College. And right after that, I headed off to Honduras and taught at a Christian school in Honduras, bilingual school, and then worked with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. I was in Honduras for 4 years. We're in InterVarsity Christian Fellowship and campus ministry for 3 years in upstate New York, Syracuse, and got married, and then went to seminary at a little school in California that doesn't exist anymore, New College, Berkeley. And we went back to Honduras as missionaries. I should say I didn't not grow up Mennonite, didn't know Mennonites, actually met Mennonites for the first time in Central America. But gradually were attracted to Anabaptism. And when we came back to the United States for me to do my doctorate in theology at Duke, we joined the Mennonite church in Durham, North Carolina. And then went back to Honduras under Eastern Mennonite Mission for a few years. And first, I guess, interacted with Mennonite brethren through teaching through SEMIA in Central America. So I was taught a couple of times in Panama, Mennonite brethren there. And then I was hired by Mennonite Brethren Biblical Seminary in Fresno, starting in 1999, and have been here since then.
Okay, wonderful. And just out of curiosity, your background or denominational background prior to encountering the Mennonite world, where would that have been?
Yeah, so I grew up in independent evangelical churches, dispensationalist, and when I went to Wheaton, which is a just mainstream evangelical, not denominationally affiliated, I went to different churches each year, 1 year at Willow Creek, 1 year at a Christian Missionary Alliance church. So I sort of a evangelical mutt. I don't mean that in a derogatory sense, but in the intermixing sense.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Very cool. I'm just gonna jump right into it here. Sadly I did not have time to read the whole thing because, well, for one, it's a commentary, and those aren't really meant to be read in one sitting.
Right.
I did read the introductory chapters a little bit, and I noticed in your introduction you mentioned how you initially became captivated by the book of Galatians because of a friend or colleague of yours, and I was wondering if you would be able to share a little bit more about that story and what happened there.
Thank you. That's a great question. As a youth ministry worker, missionary, I had a clear sense of what Galatians was about, and it was that Paul had encountered erroneous teaching that salvation was by works rather than by grace, and he wrote this letter to correct that and communicate that salvation is by grace, not works. And I utilized Galatians as a tool when I encountered people that were struggling with legalism, which was fairly prevalent in Central America in that time. And then I read an essay by Richard Hayes, a New Testament scholar, and he argued that, he invited us to pay attention to Galatians itself rather than to sort of read Galatians through the lens of Luther's experience and see what is actually going on in the letter. And really what's at the heart of Galatians is a question of community, who belongs to the community. And he tells this story in the letter in chapter 2 of something that happened in Antioch, where there was debate between Jewish Christians and a church that had included both Jewish and Gentile Christians at the same table about who appropriately could be at the table together celebrating the Lord's Supper. And Hayes said, this is at the heart of what's going on in Galatians, is a community issue. And what and that just awakened me to new possibilities of implications for Galatians and just the breadth and depth of what was going on there. And looking back on it, what I especially appreciate about what Hayes introduced me to was it was not an over and against argument. So it wasn't saying Galatians is not about we're saved by grace. Rather, it was saying it's that and so much more. And so that's something that I have sought to do in my teaching and writing about Galatians, is emphasize there's a broader, deeper message than just the narrower message that I had thought about Galatians before.
Yeah, that's awesome. Speaking of your writings about Galatians, you also mentioned in your introduction that you've written a commentary on Galatians before, but that one was in Spanish. And so I'm just kind of curious, like, what's the inspiration behind writing two commentaries on the same book, but also like, what's the difference between the two, and what are some of the different themes that come out of the Spanish version?
The simple answer is, I was invited by two different series to write a book on Galatians, and I said yes. So yeah, actually, it's even more than that. I have another book called Religious No More, in which Galatians was central to, and that was based on my dissertation. So in some sense, this is actually my third book on Galatians. And I guess the most positive thing I'd say is Galatians just keeps feeding me, surprising me, and I started this book, this commentary, with a certain sense of, okay, you're committed to do this, let's just get through it. And I was quickly and pleasantly surprised by sensing the Spirit was leading me to see new things, giving me new energy and excitement. So I have a passion for Galatians and its message and its significance for us today, and that keeps me teaching and writing about it. The Spanish commentary is a more scholarly commentary, so a more typical commentary aimed, it just has a lot more details and footnotes and things like that in it. So I was pleased to have the opportunity and the challenge to write something that was more accessible. So the main difference is sort of in the format of the series itself.
Okay.
But also, I saw new things in the process. So there are, John Barclay has done some great work on grace that I had not read before I did the Spanish commentary. And I read a dissertation by David Harvey on reading Galatians through an honor-shame lens. That also gave me some new insights for this commentary.
You've just mentioned the honor-shame lens, and I'm kind of happy about that. That's a nice segue for me, because in your introductory chapters, you mentioned how the New Testament world that Paul was writing in would have been more predominantly relied or used honor-shame dynamics as opposed to guilt forgiveness dynamics that we have here in Western culture. And so I'm curious, like, in your opinion, I guess, like how critical is it for us to use that honor shame lens when we're reading of scripture? And do you have any like really good practical tips for a Western audience to be able to practice and start experimenting with an honor shame lens when they read scripture?
So honor shame it's significant in a few different ways, and I'll think kind of narrowly in relation to Galatians. So one is for a Western audience at the most basic level, is to broaden our concept of the liberating significance of the cross of Jesus Christ, that we are saved from our guilt and we are also liberated from our shame. So for instance, I lead a Bible study in the county jail and here in Fresno, and preaching a gospel of release from guilt is a significant, valuable, important thing to do in the context of a county jail. Yet if I only proclaimed freedom from guilt, that would bring an aspect of salvation, liberation to them. But these are men that are, they are deeply burdened by shame for things that have done, that have hurt other people, the way they've let their families down. They're shamed by society. So for me to be able in that context to also proclaim that through the cross of Jesus Christ, we are liberated from shame is a significant thing. So that's at one level, just to broaden our concept of the gospel. And I would add then that is, especially in our increasingly multicultural societies, we encounter people from cultures who are more honor shame oriented and do not understand terminology of guilt and sin as easily as we do in the West. So it's of significant evangelistic significance for what interacting with people from other cultures. Then then there's also the level of understanding dynamics of scripture itself. And so in the commentary, in the end, relating to chapter 6, there's a passage where Paul is critiquing these people that have come in, these other missionaries have stirred up trouble, are pressuring the Gentile Christians to live like Jews. And he critiques them for, saying, hey, they don't really, he says to the Gentile Christians, they don't really care about you. They're concerned about their own reputation, and they're boasting in what they've done for you. And then Paul turns to say, I boast in the cross of Jesus. And I'll try to say this very briefly, but through looking at that through an honor shame lens, a few things come to light. So first of all, persecution. We think of persecution as, Christians are living in a place where there are people that are violently pursuing them because of their beliefs. But in an honor shame context, persecution can also mean just you're being shamed, you're being excluded, you're being put down, you lose face. And so I think what Paul is saying there, and these are insights that I get in part from David Harvey, what Paul is saying there is, hey, these people, they're concerned about staying on the inside, being well accepted in their religious thing. And it is a benefit to them for them to bring you into their way of doing things. And that keeps them from losing face, from losing shame. But then what does Paul turn around and he says, I boast in the cross. At the cross, Jesus actually flips the whole honor shame thing on its head. The cross was an instrument of shame. And Jesus had lived a life of including, not excluding. And so what is Paul saying there is, this is my new honor code. My new way of seeking honor is to go with the way of the cross, which is actually the opposite of the honor code of society of the day. So there's a lot more there, but I'll say, read the commentary to get into more depth.
Sure.
Now, to your last question about how to come into it, for those of the West, it's a challenge. I co-authored a book on ministering in honor shame cultures with Jason Georges, who's a missionary in Central Asia. We need guides. And so one of the things that Jason pointed out is that, the terms honor, shame don't appear a whole lot in the culture, in the Bible, because it was the culture of the time. People, they knew these things. They're in the air. So I think we need guides that help us see these things in the scripture. And in the commentary, I recommend, for instance, two novels, creative nonfiction written by Bible scholars that take us into the world at the time of the New Testament and help us feel the honor shame culture of the time. That's Lost Letters of Pergamon by Longenecker and A Week in the Life of Rome by, I can't remember whom, but it's in the biography. So I think, getting guides, and then that can help us start seeing things in scripture that our Western eyes don't see.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much. What's an easy, or not easy, what's a good way for us to start making space for honor shame interpretations and honor shame readings of scripture in our churches, so that we don't run into the, not problem, but like like we have people from honor shame cultures who are reading through a Western lens rather than, you know what I mean?
Yes. So first of all, I think a key thing is to not view this as an over and against thing. So it's not a guilt-based gospel versus a shame-based gospel, that these are in competition. We have to choose. So so we are adding to, not taking away from. So the first step is then to look for ways to begin talking about shame. And so I've worked at it. Read this book and I will help guide in Galatians ways to see this. But I think actually the Gospels are an easier place to start, because Jesus was so frequently reaching out to people who had been shamed. So I think if you read the Gospels and if you're thinking, how is Jesus bringing healing and release to people who are shamed and excluded? How is he including them, restoring their dignity? I think you'll be able to start seeing those things. Kenneth Bailey is a great guide to that in his work with parables of Jesus.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. So another theme that you mentioned in these introductory chapters, and that you've also written a book about this recently, is the bounded, fuzzy, and centered church lenses. So I was wondering, would you be able to sort of explain or share a little bit more about that? And then maybe, I don't know if your book Centered Set Church and this commentary are very intricately connected or not, but if you could maybe touch on that as well, that would be lovely.
Thank you for the question. And this is something I think of special significance for Mennonite Brethren, because Paul Hebert, who was a Mennonite Brethren missionary in India, is the one who developed this way of thinking about church: bounded, centered, and fuzzy. So he borrowed the concept from math, and it is used widely now, but it goes back to Paul Hebert. So it's something that I think justifiably Mennonite brethren can feel proud of this contribution we've made. So in brief, there are three different ways of determining who belongs to a group. And so a bounded group is one that sets up, that draws a line, that has certain things that people must comply with. And if they comply, they're on the inside of the line, they're a group. And so a bounded church has that line. And it tends to go in the way of judgmentalism, a sense of superiority, excluding people or outsiding, shaming. And this is seen in what we call legalistic churches, but very progressive churches who think of themselves as very non-legalistic can be bounded as well. They can be just as judgmental. So in response to judgmentalism, some say we have to get rid of this, and they erase the line, and that's a fuzzy church, a fuzzy group, which is like a bounded group with no line, and it tends to lose its identity. And then so Hebert advocates for a third approach, which is totally different, which discerns the way that people belong by looking at their orientation to a center. So in this case, Jesus Christ is the center, and to see whether people are part of the church is, are they heading toward the center or heading away from it? So yeah, let me say that again. So I explore this in my book, Centered Set Church. I go into depth of explaining the concepts, but then especially in living them out. In this Luminaire Studies series book, what I've sought to do is to give a deeper biblical basis for Centered Set Church. So I say to people, this book is both a way to deepen your thinking and understanding of Centered Set Church, but also the Centered Set Church lens also is a way to add greater understanding to Galatians. And so let me say more about that. Looking at it through the lens of bounded and centered churches helps get the sense that in Galatians, the issues, the problems were more than just an incorrect teaching about salvation by grace. And so an important thing to note in Galatians is everyone involved is already a Christian. So there's Gentile Christians in Galatia, there's Jewish Christian, Paul's a Jewish Christian, and these other missionaries that show up are Jewish Christians. So this is not about people who are doing evangelism to non-Christians. This is a debate with Christians who have already responded to a gospel of grace. And so that's where I think the bounded set church concept helps get a sense of the group dynamic that is going on and the tension between one way of approaching who belongs at the table, the Lord's Supper, the church fellowship, and another way, a centered approach of who belongs.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. And just out of curiosity, like the two books, like the Luminaire Study and your book, Centered Set Church, like if someone were to pick up this commentary and read it, they don't necessarily need to read Centered Set Church and vice versa, right? That's...
What do you mean by need?
Like you can read one without...
Oh, yes, correct.
Other. Yeah, okay. Wicked. Wonderful.
Yeah, so let me say a sentence about that, which you could use or not. These books are complementary.
Okay.
They are not volume 1 and volume 2.
Gotcha.
So if you read the Luminaire book, I would tell you, if you would like more, if you'd like to read more about living out this approach, read Centered Set Church. And if you read Centered Set Church, I would tell you, and if you'd like to know more about a biblical basis of Centered Set Church, read the Luminaire commentary.
I see. Okay. Wonderful. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. Just in closing, are there any other really critical things or key themes that you would want people to know prior to picking up or reading this Luminaire commentary? Or is there anything that you're really excited about that you really want to tell people about it?
Well, related to what I just said about this being a letter that was written to Christians in regard to a debate among Christians, one of the themes that I continually came back to in the letter and is more than once in the implication sections at the end of chapters is the necessity that we continue to proclaim the gospel, not just to non-Christians, but to ourselves. I think Galatians is a wake-up call to remind us that the gospel of Jesus Christ is radical. It is not our natural way of doing things, thinking about things. And therefore, we need to continually, regularly be reminded that our salvation, our place in the people of God is based on the work of God through Jesus Christ at the cross. And to be reminded and brought back to that center rather than thinking, I did that once when I was 6, 8, 18, 28, and now I've moved on to other things.
Right.
If we don't, we very easily slip back into bounded group religiosity and an attitude that my works and what I do are what gives me a place in this community. Back on the question about the differences between the books. I mean, many people will know this, but for those who don't, maybe to put in a sentence saying, and the Luminaire, this current volume, yeah, I already said it's more accessible. To also say something, it's designed for use by groups and has, reflection questions at the end of each chapter.
Yeah. Okay.
Probably a good thing to get in.
Wonderful. Okay. Lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you.